I'm not trying to come down on anyone right now, but I just gotta tell you, you need to watch your language. It's a little offensive. I'm talking about the way that you talk to yourself. Watch your language. Some of you right now have some language that you need to be mindful of. Language says a lot about our beliefs. It says a lot about the story that we tell about ourselves. One of the most frequent language that I hear in session, or when I'm out on the road talking with people about the Rewriting My Story program, is this notion of good and bad. I was good this weekend, or I was bad this weekend. And a lot of times we use those terms, and we all know what that means in reference to food. I was good, I ate on plan, or I ate based on what I wanted to do. I made good food choices, or I was bad, I got off plan, I made bad food choices. There's a lot of power, though, in that dichotomy of good and bad, and I really encourage you right now to give it up. You need to watch your language. Good and bad leads to these two boxes. There's no such thing, first of all, as two boxes of good or bad. Nothing long-term about that. We talk about all the time, you have to have a journey mindset, not a destination mindset. This is not about being good and bad. It's not about reaching a number on a scale. This is about being around long-term. It's about living out your why. It's about all of the things that are much bigger than this one particular moment. Now, what does that mean? There's no standards that you just do whatever you want, and there's no way of categorizing that. No. Obviously, the choices that you make have an impact. There are consequences to them. When you have a plan for the weekend, and all of a sudden, you emotionally eat, or you eat things that you weren't planning on eating, there's consequences to that. There's no way around that. But why do I have such an issue with the language of good and bad? Because it creates this system of being in or being out. And what often happens is that when we create this system of either I'm doing well or I'm doing bad, I'm either good or I'm bad, essentially what you're saying to yourself is you're saying, I'm good, I'm bad. And what happens is eventually we develop resentment towards that system. So even if we know that eating good is what's good for us, eventually we become resentful of it. And on the right day, as we talk about, where you have the right amount of stress, you have the right amount of anxiety, you have the right amount of whatever your trigger emotions are, and there's some resentment coming in. Now, being good and eating good all of a sudden becomes a chore. Even though it's what's good for you, right? Like you would say it's congruent with your why, but the minute that you start to think of it as this thing that you should do, that's when human nature kicks in and we start to say, well, I don't want to. There's a difference between looking at food choices, showing up to the gym, making time for yourself versus I was good versus I was bad. Get rid of the good, bad stuff. Think of this more as, am I living out my why? Again, we talk about in the program all the time, what is your why? It has to be legacy-based, it has to be long-term, it has to be bigger than you. Why do you want to be healthy? Now, when you look at that why, you can reverse engineer that back to the food choices that you're making. You're not always going to be perfect. But again, we're on this slaying shame tour because part of this notion of shame is what is keeping us in these ruts. Good and bad language, dichotomies, binaries, I'm either in or I'm out. That language is a life support system to shame. It fully supports shame. So if you want to do yourself a favor and get rid of shame, part of what you have to do is watch your language. No more I was good, no more I was bad. Stop judging your choices. It's okay to have standards. But instead, focus on the bigger picture. Focus on your why. Because when you do that, and you're going to inevitably make choices that aren't congruent with your why. But if you frame it in terms of why and not good and bad, the difference is this. The bump in the road doesn't seem as big of a bump. The detour doesn't seem like it derailed you. You'll be more likely to keep on going if you frame it in this way versus this thing of I was good, I was bad. It's a big pet peeve of mine. I'm really a big believer in language being very important. So good, bad, get rid of it. Instead, let's look at some different type of language on how we would evaluate, if we need to evaluate, how we would evaluate the choices that we make with our health. You guys have an awesome Friday.